Thank you very much, and I apologize for the delay, everyone. Technical issues, I guess. My name is Jeff Leeper. I'm the City Councillor for Kitchissippi Ward, and I chair the city's Planning and Housing Committee. Good afternoon to everyone. Bonjour à tous. I would like to begin by recognizing that we are gathered here today on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the peoples and lands of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. The City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. On behalf of the city, I'd like to welcome city councillors, their staffs, media to this briefing. We're here today to discuss the new urban and village boundary expansion official plan application process, which will be presented at a joint meeting of the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee and Planning and Housing Committee on October the 9th. The province is introducing a new provincial planning statement that comes into effect on October the 20th, and this will impact the way the city does business. Perhaps the biggest change for the city is that private landowners can request an urban expansion or a village expansion at any time. Typically, these boundary expansions only occur during comprehensive official plan updates that occur every 5 years. The next comprehensive official plan review, where lands could be added to the urban area, is scheduled to start in 2025. This public process is part of regular operations of the city and does not require an application fee for landowners to have their lands considered and rated for inclusion. It allows the city to properly plan for growth, handle infrastructure and servicing requirements, and ensure it has a 15-year land supply for development. By allowing such requests at any time, we are worried it could result in a more piecemeal approach for planning in Ottawa. Allowing landowners to make expansion official plan amendment applications outside of that 5-year cycle will require considerable staff time and resources, and for new studies to assess lands appropriately and plan for infrastructure and servicing needs, including transportation. As such, any applications for expansion that are not part of the city's 15-year land supply will require a fee. Now, staff will provide an overview of the application process in greater detail and walk us through how they arrived at this new application type and fee. With us today, from Planning, Development and Building Services to deliver the presentation, we have Derek Moody, Director of Planning Services, Alexandre Leblanc, Program Manager of Planning Operations, and Royce Fu, Manager of Policy Planning. They will be available to answer your questions today. After the briefing, I will open the floor for questions from council, beginning with one question and one follow-up. If time permits, additional questions can be posed once all members have had their turn. When members of council have asked their questions, we will take a short recess before resuming with the media availability. I will now hand it over to staff for their presentation.
Thank you, Chair, for those introductions. We can turn to the next slide. So we're here because of recent changes to the provincial planning statement. Just by way of background, the PPS guides land use planning in Ontario. Planning authorities, committee, council, committee of adjustment, the tribunal, have to have planning decisions that are consistent with the PPS. The province announced updates to the PPS in April of 2023, and then a second draft in April of 2024. Staff have provided memorandum to council on these drafts and submitted comments to the province on these drafts. A new PPS was announced on August 20th, 2024, which staff also provided to council a memorandum in September. The 2024 PPS takes effect on October 20th, 2024, a little more than 2 weeks away. As Chair Leeper mentioned, there are significant changes to growth projections, the basis for growth projections that planning authorities must use, and how we plan for our urban and village areas. Staff provided a report seeking approval of a collaborative framework to adapt to the new PPS before October 20th. Next slide. So the two changes to the PPS. First, municipalities must use the Ontario Ministry of Finance's population projections as the basis of growth, the next official plan review. There isn't a significantly large change on this, as Ministry of Finance population projections are provided for the province and also at the census division level, being upper tier and single tier municipalities. We have used Ministry of Finance population projections for consideration in our last official plan updates. So as a matter of practice, the City of Ottawa has already done this. The real change is that we must include those population projections as a basis for growth going forward. The second change is that private landowners can request an urban or village expansion at any time. And at any time, we mean that request can be received through an official plan amendment application. Normally, this occurs through official plan reviews or official plan updates. The two terms are synonymous, typically every 5 years. So this change in the PPS allows landowners to make applications outside of those 5-year review windows. Next slide. So staff have provided a report with 4 recommendations. The first recommendation seeks an approval for a framework for how the city will manage growth in an orderly fashion. The first part of the framework speaks to a collaborative process in updating our growth projections and land supply with landowners, stakeholders, the public, and council together through one process. We would also advance the initiation of that update instead of 2030, which we are entitled to under the Planning Act, as we have a new official plan. We advance that to 2025 instead. The framework also seeks to provide some parameters on what this means for applications while that update is going on, so that we could review and council can make decisions on any interim expansions while that process for the update is ongoing. Recommendations 2, 3, and 4 speak to updating our bylaws to introduce a new application type. So this is not a standard official plan amendment application. It is a specific application for the consideration of urban and village area boundary expansions. It's a specific process. There are specific studies that would be required, and including a dedicated fee. Next slide. So our objectives with our recommendations is to adopt a collaborative, non-litigious approach to assessing our growth needs. This is an approach that we would work together, very similar to what we did in 2020 and 2021 with the new official plan, and how we adopted our growth management strategy moving forward with landowners, stakeholders, and the public together through one single process. We believe we want to help build homes faster, and we can do this by updating our growth projections 5 years earlier than regularly scheduled. This allows us to also recover the full costs of assessing expansion applications. There's a lot of work that goes into reviewing these submissions. There are additional resources and consultants that would be required to assess these applications. And we want to recover these costs because council has given us a work plan and deadlines for what we have to accomplish this term of council. We have to develop a new zoning bylaw by the end of 2025, deliver a transportation master plan in 2025, and implement the newly adopted infrastructure master plan, which also has new programs for monitoring and assessing infrastructure capacity. So in order to deliver on these priorities that council has already established, staff will need additional resources to review these applications should they be submitted. Next slide. So the framework is predicated on 4 key points. The first is that the city will initiate a growth projection update and land needs review in 2025. And the focus of this review is really longer term, more towards the 25 and 30-year horizon. And we would use the latest Ministry of Finance population projections as part of that process. Now, a couple of notes about the Ministry of Finance population projections. They are updated annually so that they are consistently changing. The second part is that the Ministry of Finance only provides population projections. Municipalities have to use those projections and then translate that to households and dwelling type needs, jobs, and the associated land supply that comes with those projections. And that exercise does not occur overnight. We think back to the new official plan process in 2021, that was part of the growth management strategy and that process to translate the population projections that council adopted in 2019. So what's the role of expansion applications while we are undertaking this exercise? Well, in the interim, while that review is ongoing, starting in 2025, expansion applications shall be based on the current official plan growth projections. And this is totally appropriate and it's good practice. While we're updating the projections and the application wants to proceed, they would use the in-force growth projections in the official plan. And the framework of that review would also be to maintain a 15-year minimum land supply. So that is still a requirement in 2024 PPS, is that the municipalities must maintain a 15-year minimum land supply. So really applications would be looking at using our current growth projections and ensuring that we have that 15-year minimum land supply, while 2025 growth projections seeks for that longer term 25-year outlook and how we can plan for those lands in a longer term. One item of note under as a third pillar of the framework is that as per the 2024 PPS, these applications are required to have planned capacity within our existing master plans. So that means there has to be residual capacity in a 2024 infrastructure master plan and a 2013 transportation master plan. The applications are not intended to be added and therefore require an update for additional servicing projects to those master plans. So after that capacity is assessed, in the fourth pillar, lands need to meet location criteria. And this is specified in 2024 PPS, but also it would be similar criteria to what council adopted through the growth management exercise in the new official plan, where we want to have lands at the best locations and the most efficient areas for servicing perspective. And that includes, for example, not including agricultural lands. After this report, staff will initiate an official plan amendment to update our official plan to include what this criteria would look like. And that would be open to a public process so that landowners, stakeholders, the public, and council can consider what that criteria looks like. Next slide. So what does the upcoming process to add lands look like? Well, first, we want to confirm that the current official plan projections were based on Ministry of Finance population projections at the time of development, including benchmarking Statistics Canada population projections for Ontario. So come October 20th, 2024, our current official plan growth projections will be consistent with the PPS. One of the issues, I spoke to this earlier in terms of Ministry of Finance projections, is that they update them annually. And the projections have increased significantly to 2046 since the official plan was based on the 2019 projections to the more recent projections. Ministry of Finance just released projections this week for 2024. We anticipate that they will also release projections in 2025. Staff recognize that there's a significant increase to the projections since when they were based on in the official plan in 2019. And that is why staff is recommending that we start that official plan review in 2025 to look at those projections to see if there are any land needs associated with them. And we propose to do that again through that comprehensive process, similar to what we have done in the new official plan. And this is consistent with a full reading of the PPS, what the Planning Act allows, and the province's intentions to implement the 2024 PPS, where those growth projections would be done through an official plan review or update. We would use those projections and we would determine land need. And that's the other thing the PPS speaks to, is that growth projections need to be informed by provincial guidance. And one of the issues before us is that provincial guidance is not yet available. Or more accurately, it's severely out of date. The current projections methodology guidelines are dated to 1995. The province recognizes that they are significantly out of date and are working on updating those guidelines today. However, we do not anticipate that they'll be ready for use before 2024, likely to be ready to be used in 2025, which then aligns with our initiation of the update in 2025, where we could use them to help guide our determination of our land needs. And should we need the potential for expansion lands, council can then use that process to rate what are our best options for expansion parcels. So this is that collaborative process between the city, landowners, stakeholders, and the public. And as a city-led process, similar to past reviews, there would be no fee for landowners for reviewing their requested parcels for inclusion should we need expansion. Next slide. This is a map just to provide sort of an overview of what council added in the new official plan for urban expansion areas. They're shown in the hatched magenta. You can see that the areas in Orleans, sort of the Taywin in the mustard in the southeast with Leitrim. We have Riverside South and Barhaven areas in the southwest, and the areas in Stittsville. All these areas combine to be about 1,280 hectares. Since council added these lands, 95% of them have either commenced a secondary plan process or are very close to starting their secondary plan process, which means of the remaining vacant supply, these will be the next lands that come on to supplement our 15-year minimum land supply. In 2022, staff estimated that we had, with these lands, expansion lands, a 25-year land supply. Next slide. So some folks might be asking, what about the lands that were rated in the last official plan that were not added into the urban boundary? So for the 2025 process, staff anticipates that the criteria to rate candidate lands would be very similar to what we looked at in the new official plan. There are category 1 lands in the new official plan process that council did not add. Category 1 lands is a refresher, were those lands that best met our growth management principles to be added to the urban area. One of the issues is that because council did not add these lands to the official plan, the 2024 infrastructure master plan and the 2013 transportation master plan did not plan for these lands. So when we think back to the 2024 PPS requirements for expansion applications, they're actually more restrictive because if they're not in the master plans, then there would be little capacity for the inclusion of these lands through an application process. However, the collaborative approach the staff is recommending to start in 2025 would allow the assessment of these candidate lands to be planned for and then therefore updated in the following infrastructure and transportation master plans. Next slide. So just as a refresher of land evaluation categories that council looked at as part of the official plan, the new official plan, we have the yellow areas are the category 1 lands that scored well, that had strong adherence to our growth management principles. Category 2 lands were in green that didn't score quite as well, sort of had partial adherence to our growth management principles. And category 3 lands were areas that staff recommended to review for further information. The lands in Canada North, sort of South March area, are the lands that scored well as a category 1, but were not added to the urban area. The criteria that we use in the new official plan would carry forward in 2025. These lands have a good chance of scoring very well. Next slide. So in terms of the summary of the 2025 process and framework, 2024 PPS comes into effect on October 20th and will permit applications for boundary expansions at any time. Staff wish to provide an orderly, upfront approach so that folks know what our roadmap is over the next few years and how we can make it easier and faster to plan for future growth. We actually think it will be faster and easier rather than an application-led process, which would be piecemealed over time. The city will advance our growth projection update and land needs review from 2030 to 2025. And this will be at no cost to applicants. In the interim, expansion official plan applications could be considered where the current official plan growth projections and adequacy of 15-year land supply is not met, and there's existing residual capacity in the in effect TMP and IMP. So that's a wrap up on the 2025 process and summary. I'll turn it over to Alex to provide some further details on the application process and outcomes.
Thanks, Royce. We're going to go with next slide. So in terms of the boundary expansion application, there's going to be some new documentation requirements that answer 3 main questions. So there's going to be a land need assessment, which is going to answer the question, do we need more land to meet that 15-year land supply in the provincial policy and the provincial planning statement? There's going to be an infrastructure capacity assessment, which is going to answer the question, is there capacity that is planned or existing in our master plans? And if not, what would be needed? And then there's going to be a third document, which is a settlement area parcel analysis, which is going to answer the question, why these specific lands as opposed to others in terms of the city's long-term interest. To review these, there's also going to be a graduated fee structure that is going to ensure full cost recovery to the city and will also allow for off-ramps at key decision points. Next slide, please. So to frame this conversation, it's important to go through the city's master plans and the investment that the city made in various past years to get to this point. So the official plan, which was delivered not too long ago, was a $3.4 million investment. It's the base upon which the other city master plans are developed. The infrastructure master plan, which was just approved by council in June 2024, was a $1.9 million investment. And it relies on the lands within the urban area and population projections to plan for appropriate servicing for existing and new lands, as well as identification of specific capital projects to accommodate population growth. The transportation master plan, which is still underway to be delivered next year, was a $2.3 million investment that is budgeted for, and it examines again, the lands and the population projection to assess the transportation needs, and then prioritizes the transportation infrastructure investments to service these new and existing lands. Those 3 master plans together create the long-range financial plan, which is the capital investment for the long term by the city. It's very expensive to complete these master plans, and it's also very expensive to update them piecemeal. Next slide, please. In considering the cost of expansion application, it's important to highlight also that city resources that typically work on these are currently occupied with current work on implementing the infrastructure master plan, developing the transportation master plan, and delivering on the new zoning bylaw to meet the council approved timelines for these master plans that will serve existing lands that are currently in the urban boundary. The estimated costs for additional resources to assess expansion application are listed on this slide. The total city pressure is $1.8 million, which is the basis for the proposed graduated fee structure. If it's not a fee, otherwise, it would fall to the taxpayers to recover these costs and to cover these costs, and that's not fair to Ottawa taxpayers. Next slide, please. This slide provides visualization of the steps to review an expansion application and the off-ramps at key decision points. To consider whether lands should be added to the urban boundary, it's proposed that staff or a hired consultant conduct a servicing capacity assessment. This is in the blue, so 1 and 2. As applicants don't have access to sufficient off-site infrastructure information or models relating to the city's drinking water and sanitary sewer networks, applicants will require assistance from the city to determine if sufficient planned capacity exists in the relevant master plans. The infrastructure work, again, is illustrated in blue. The first part is to assess whether there's existing capacity. The cost for this work is $250,000. And where capacity does not exist, the second part would be to identify the projects and the cost for these offsite works that would be required to accommodate the expansion. The applicant would then finalize the remainder of their submission requirements that we talked about a couple of slides ago and would submit them to the city as part of their official plan application for urban and village boundary expansion. They would also pay the fee of $1.4 million. The planning work is split into 3 parts, identified as step 3, 4, and 5 in purple. So the first part is the land need assessment. Staff will review the growth projections and corresponding land supply assessment provided by the applicant. Staff will then share a draft recommendation following their analysis with the applicant as to whether it has been proven or not that more land is needed to meet the 15-year land supply requirement in the provincial planning statement. Based on this draft recommendation, the applicant can select to withdraw at this stage. Should there be no outstanding right to appeal, a refund of $1.05 million would be administered. Should they decide to not withdraw and move forward, they would be moving towards step 4, where we will complete a transportation, agriculture, and infrastructure assessment and doing the comparative parcel analysis. So this work is ensuring that the PPS, the official plan, and the terms of references are adhered to, while ensuring that the lands that would be added are the best land for the long-term interest of the city. Staff will then provide a draft recommendation to the applicant stating the staff position on the land. Based on the draft recommendation, the applicant can again withdraw at this stage. Should there be no outstanding appeal, a refund of $300,000 would be administered. Should the applicant select to not withdraw, they would move forward onto step 5, which is a decision by council, where staff would present a report to council with its recommendations. And then should council approve, we would update our master plans, geographic information system, web pages, and communicate changes to stakeholders. Next slide, please. We also wanted to offer some municipal comparison and that speak to the approach that Ottawa is taking in terms of an expansion application. So we want to support our home building industry, but not at the expense of the taxpayer. So in our approach, the taxpayer cost for an application review, there is none planned. In other jurisdictions, there has been an appeal fund of 1.5 million that's funded from tax that is proposed. In terms of application cost to review application, we are offering council a true cost recovery model to cover for the $1.8 million pressure with off-ramps for applicants that choose not to move forward at certain points. While in other jurisdictions, the fee ranges from $80,000 to $250,000, but the consulting fees that are required to do the detailed modeling work is not included in this fee. That's separate. So it's in addition to this, so it's a little bit hidden in that sense. And then thirdly, in Ottawa, we're going to be doing a proactive investment by the municipality to update our growth projections earlier. We're taking this collaborative approach at no cost to stakeholders, starting in 2025 as opposed to 2030, whereas in other jurisdictions, this work is not planned. Next slide, please. So in terms of outcomes, the city will initiate a no-fee public process to update its growth projection and land supply in 2025 to conclude in 12 to 18 months using the latest Ministry of Finance growth projections. The city will deliver a new zoning bylaw and a new transportation master plan in 2025 based on the current official plan projections. Applicants will be offered a graduated fee process for interim expansion applications at cost recovery to the city. And then the city will then update the IMP and the TMP following the growth projection review. That concludes the presentation for today.
Thank you very much, Royce, Alexandra, and Derek. We'll move into questions from councillors. I note that we are joined online by quite a few members of Planning and Housing and Agriculture and Rural Affairs. In the room, there are councillors as well. Use the hands up feature in Zoom so I can call on you, or if you're in the room, put your hand up if you have questions. My brilliant colleagues on both committees have understood it all and have no questions.
There's an actual hand up over here.
Oh, I'm sorry, David.
I was going to log in and try and put my hand up, but I thought it would take a little longer.
Please go ahead.
I just was wondering perhaps if you could unpack a little bit more the sequential nature here of all of this stuff that's going on with the different plans in place, because you referred to 2025 as the bring forward of the growth projection review, which was originally going to happen in 2030. And I believe if I'm reading this correctly, what we're trying to do is really encourage that that is the time where we look at these future expansion land options, because it can be more cohesive. It can align with the infrastructure master plan, the transportation master plan, and those types of things. But 2025 is also when we're going to be finalizing the zoning bylaw review process. So can you just walk me through kind of how that sequentially, like, are you going to conclude the zoning bylaw process and then all the folks that were doing that good work then muckle on to the growth projections work, or is that stuff going to be happening simultaneously, or how is that going to kind of deconflict in time and space?
Thank you. That's actually an excellent summary, Councillor. So we would start the growth update in 2025. Anticipate take 12 to 18 months for that completion. While that is started, the new zoning bylaw would be completed simultaneously, so that once it's completed, we would sort of still stay on course for the growth projections. Staff in the zoning bylaw will not likely shift to the official plan growth update, as they will probably be working on implementing the zoning bylaw after council adoption. But the timeline would be initiation of the growth updates in 2025, completion of the TMP 2025, zoning bylaw by the end of 2025, and then 2026, hopefully completion of the growth update.
One follow-up there, Chair. How concerned should we be if we're going to be concluding our zoning bylaw process and then revisiting our growth projection numbers after? Like, are we concerned that we may be deliberately kind of missing the target big time?
So, Councillor, I probably not, because the growth updates really is looking at what we in longer term, and this might be sort of more suburban type of growth, in which case does not really impact the new zoning bylaw in the short term. If there's sort of any implications for maybe intensification, we could look at updating the zoning bylaw after the fact. So it's sort of simultaneous. We would complete the growth projections. If there's implications for intensification, we can then revisit the zoning bylaw as appropriate. But the zoning bylaw, most of the mechanics there speak to land that's already in the urban area and how do we continue growing and evolving our city in the future.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor Hill. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you very much, Chair. So, you know, my heart is pounding right now. My palms are sweating because I know how under fire the planning department has been with all of the plans that you've had to be working on simultaneously for the last, since I was elected. I have two questions. So one is, can you anticipate that this direction in the provincial policy statement will in fact open up the city to further litigation that it wasn't exposed to before? I know that in one of the first slides, it said that you're trying to do this as a way of creating a non-litigious environment, but of course, by opening an expansion criteria and having, you know, determination, we may have people fall on different sides of that argument. I would assume that those acceptances into the urban boundary or rejections of the application would be subject to litigation if the applicant so chose.
So yes, Councillor, that is correct, that under the Planning Act as amended, there could be appeals to the 2025 start of that growth update. But in contrast to the application approach, the appeals, I think, could be scoped to that one process as opposed to multiple applications having multiple appeals to be dealt with over a longer time frame.
Okay. So to clarify, I don't know if this counts as my second question, but to clarify, when you're highlighting this process, you're trying to create a moment in time in which we would get these applications and be able to deal with them in more of a cohesive way, even on the appeals end of things, versus a staggered popcorn forever and ever amen type of situation.
That's a correct way to characterize it, that collaborative approach. We look at all that in one process, and because it's collaborative in nature, that in theory should reduce the amount of potential appeals through a single process.
Okay. So sorry, Chair, that was a clarifying question. So can I get my second question?
Sure.
Thanks. So my second question is, when you were saying that you are requiring additional resources because there are not the bodies to be doing this work, will we see a request in the 2025 budget for additional FTEs in your department? And how's the hiring going generally? Are we confident that we'll be able to secure people in time to meet some of these deadlines that you've proposed?
Councillor, at this point, we are not projecting additional resources within the planning policy group. With respect to overall hiring, you know, there are some challenges, but there are some successes as well. We are, you know, recently just closed a number of competitions. We had good uptake and we're going through the candidate lists for that. But, you know, as an example, we had over 100 applicants to a recent job posting that we put out for an introductory planner position. And so there are people that are continue to be interested in working for the city. You know, we've got to go through that list and see how many are qualified and how many of them meet the needs that we have. But, you know, we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue to attract people. Some areas are more of a challenge, you know, and it depends on the type of work that we're doing.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to staff for the presentation and the memo that preceded it. I guess the question is just whether or not city staff have had conversations with the province about you know, how ridiculous the policy is to have one-off applications for expansion of the urban boundary, and that staff are not in agreement with it, and that the city, it'll be detrimental for our city, our taxpayers, to have the provincial process that they've set up executed. So just where are those conversations with the province that this is ridiculous policy?
Chair, staff provided comments whenever they were consulting on the updated provincial planning statement. We identified some of our concerns with respect to the piecemeal approach of applications for boundary expansions. The ministry is aware of our concerns, but this is the policy that they ultimately approved on August 20th.
And is there a timeline that you mentioned of when you have to get this in place for? I'm sorry if I missed that in the presentation, for when you have to have it approved.
The provincial planning statement comes into effect on October the 20th. And so we're gearing up to have everything in order in advance of that. Our current official plan and processes don't contemplate boundary expansion applications. And that's why we are coming forward today with the report that's been posted to put the requirements in place, so that if somebody does want to apply or consider applying potentially as soon as October 21st, that we've got a framework for them to work within.
Okay. In the past, staff have done the analysis with Hempson and others.
Councilor Bernard.
Oh,
Sorry, it's one question, one follow-up. So I'll get to the colleagues. I'm just taking a look at staff to see if we'll have the additional time afterwards, just for some last follow-ups.
Okay.
But I'll get
sure,
to
I won't jump back on. I'm just wondering if they're doing cost estimates for the city on expansion like we've done before. But I'm done there. If you want to, maybe they can follow up with me over email. So.
Yeah, and I imagine that's something you'll want to explore as well when we actually have a PHC IRAC meeting next week too. So thank you very much, Councilor Bernard. Councilor Kitts.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to staff. I know this is a heavy lift in a short timeline. I feel like my first question is, can we get a refund on our official plan? It feels like the dog ate our homework and we have nothing to show for all of our hard work. So frustrating in that sense. I assume we'll get further into this at committee. But what kind of dialogue has happened with the industry on this? I get the sense that the fee is meant to be a disincentive because we would prefer applicants to wait until we have the opportunity to do this work holistically. But is it a disincentive? Like, given the unit potential of some of these parcels, is that number prohibitive, or would it be considered a workable cost of business? What's your sense?
Councillor, I'll start by saying the fee is not intended to be a disincentive. It's intended to cost recover for the effort that is required in order to update our master plans. Whether it's a disincentive or not, remains to be seen. Our preference is yes, and I think we're upfront with saying that our preference is that the industry would work with us through 2025 and 2026 to do this in a collaborative and cohesive way across the city. From being a disincentive to apply early, we recognize that the fee is much greater than anything we have ever seen in the city before. That said, the value that we're dealing with respect to land development is, 4 or 5 acres may very well offset of land coming into the boundary, may offset the application fees.
Okay, thank you. I've certainly seen jigsaw type planning in my ward, and I appreciate that it goes better when we can look at the whole system. So my follow-up is just, can I confirm that land zoned AG, agricultural land, will be prohibited from applying?
We can't prohibit anybody from applying.
Okay.
We're creating a framework that follows the same criteria that we went through in our last official plan update, which avoided agricultural lands.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kitts. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just would like to follow up on Councillor Johnson's line of questioning around the legalities and potential appeals that would come, particularly around the one-off applications by landowners. And I'm just struggling with who actually has the final say here, and it's not clear to me who they would appeal these decisions to. Would they be subject to OLT appeals and hearings, and is there a body that would rule on an appeal that would be binding to the city of Ottawa, or are we making the final decision on what lands are in the urban boundary?
So, Councillor, I'll start off and I'll invite legal counsel to also jump in and provide any corrections. So, In terms of applications, the Planning Act has been amended to allow for appeals on applications or decisions for urban and village boundary expansions, and that would be to the Ontario Land Tribunal. I believe that's the question.
That was the question, yeah.
Yeah, and that's correct, Chair. These would be appeals that are heard by the Ontario Land Tribunal, much the same as any other planning decision made by municipalities.
Did you have a follow-up question, Councillor Kelly?
I do not. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh?
Yeah, thank you. Wow, it's a lot to absorb. You were talking about agricultural land, and I want to ask about Greenbelt. It was always assumed, especially because we, from the official plan, that Greenbelt was protected land. And we even went out of our way to make sure it was protected around Moody Station, for example. And this is owned by the NCC, it's city land. Federal land, I guess, in that context. But what's up with that? So what is the status now?
Councillor, the status wouldn't change. The Greenbelt remains as part of the Greenbelt Transect. As NCC owned lands, they would not be part of our selection process unless they approach the city for a request, which would be interesting. But I think we're looking more towards the rural area on lands that are not agricultural, should we require an expansion.
Okay, I just had to get that answer because it is a concern to people in my ward, and they went out of their way to make sure it was protected. Wow, it's just a lot to absorb. Can I just get a recap? How does Taywin fit in on this?
Councillor, Taywin is added by council into the urban area, so it is included within our urban area today, and Taywin is going through a secondary plan exercise today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Desroches?
Thanks, Chair. On the one hand, I appreciate that this has become more of a local decision rather than a provincial decision on when and how we would add lands to the urban boundary, which may or may not be justified for a whole long list of criteria, with particular concern over the growth that is going into the satellite communities that add a lot to our transportation network, yet we don't collect any taxation. So I at least appreciate that this is a local decision rather than provincial. But what I appreciated of the previous process, that the decisions were based on need, and now it's an application-based process. So can you just highlight and maybe explain a bit better how what the intersection is between that we need the land and that applications are presented to us? I'm sure the applicants believe the need is there, but at the end of the day, we have to determine through our own process that there truly is a need.
So, Councillor, what staff proposed in our framework is that applications would have to rely on the current official plan projections as a basis to identify the need. And then that the bar for the 15-year land supply is not met. So that is up to the applicant to determine how those two forces may come together. And then there's also just the analysis on the infrastructure capacity to accommodate and service those lands.
And just as a follow-up, what is presently the city's position? Obviously, when the previous plan was developed and the decision was made by council, the view, I think, was that the need was satisfied, right? Because we weren't adding any more and the province intervened. So is it presently our position as a city that our need is satisfied, or we are open to considering? I mean, obviously we're open to considering because we're required to do so. What's our position on need?
So, Councillor, with our current projections, we have about 25-year land supply. However, this is part of the issue with the provincial Ontario Ministry of Finance projections. They're quite a bit higher. So that's why staff is recommending starting that exercise to do that evaluation, using the new projection and do an analysis on whether we have a 15-year land supply, but more importantly, how much supply do we need to the end of that planning period? So more that longer term, that 25-year sort of horizon that I spoke to earlier.
Thank you very much. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor DeRoche?
I think I burned it, Chair. Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will just follow up on Councillor DeRoche. I believe we are out of time for councillor questions. And there are two hands up. Councillor Kitts, Councillor Kavanaugh, had you intended to pose a?
I'll take it down. No, thanks.
Thank you. So I just wanted to follow up on the issue of the guidance that we are waiting for from the province. Can you just clarify what is that guidance that we're seeking with respect to the timing of using the different projections? And will we have that in time for a decision next week at committee and then the following week at council?
So, Chair, unfortunately, no timelines have been provided by the province on when those guidelines would be available. The Ministry of Finance does update their projections annually, typically in the summer. So we could expect the next update to be in the summer of 2025. In absence of any information, staff is hopeful that the guidelines would be along the similar timelines, if not sooner.
Okay, thank you. So that is the time that we have available for councillor questions. Colleagues, thank you very much for your excellent questions. I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion at the joint meeting next week. We're going to take a 10-minute recess and then media will have the opportunity to pose questions as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
welcome back, and thanks for joining us. My name is Aziz Khalil, and I will be your moderator. Je serai votre modérateur aujourd'hui. I will now invite each agency to ask their questions. You may ask one question with one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des médias qui pourront poser une question et une question de suivi. We'll now start with Elise Gura, CBC.
Thanks very much, and thanks for answering our questions today. So my first question is about the parcels of land that were already evaluated but not chosen to be added to the urban boundary. I would assume that some of these kind of evaluations were done previously. Is there an opportunity to reuse that work, and would it affect the fee for those developers?
So some of the infrastructure analysis has been done with respect to whether or not there's capacity. When they were added in by the minister previously, we started down a path of looking at those. So we can reuse some of that information, and there is a, in the big scheme of things, a modest reduction in the fee or an ability for them to get some credit for that work that has already been completed.
And I also wanted to ask about the speeding up of the process for review to 2025. I'm just wondering, you said that you won't need any additional staff, but is that going to create any additional budget pressures that you can find, or and if so, would we be looking to the province to kind of make the city whole on that?
So in terms of the additional staff, that was in relation to question on the zoning bylaw. Staff under consultants, now the staff could be internal, moving from one area to another to help out in the official plan review. But for something like this, we may also look at consultants as an option.
And if that's the case, sorry, just for the second half of that question, the fees will not be in place then, because it would be free at that point for developers. So how is that going to be paid for? Entirely from taxpayers?
So that would be part of the regular budget cycle for an official plan review. That the source of the funding would likely be from the tax base.
Thanks, Lise. And we'll now go to Joanne Loshis at Ottawa Citizen.
So when Councillor Leeper sort of framed the whole question today, he said it would result in a more piecemeal approach. Is it going to be a more piecemeal approach? And if so, can you give me some concrete examples of how this would work so that members of the general public might be able to understand that?
So just to clarify, a piecemeal approach in terms of an application by application process, or just overall?
In terms of the way the city grows.
So in the framework that staff has provided is that it would be sort of one single collaborative process over 12 to 18 months, where we would use the same information from the Ministry of Finance projections and determine what the land needs are together. And then we could evaluate our best options. So that is the preferred approach. Without that framework in place, an alternate scenario could be that applicants apply to expand the urban village areas and then use population projections as a basis, but then would have their own methods of determining what does that mean for housing and job demand and related land supply. There is no single method to do that. So one applicant may use one method, another applicant maybe a few months down the road may use another method, an applicant a year later may use yet another method. And so that is sort of the piecemeal approach that we foresee in that scenario, is different sort of demands and land needs. And then if the land needs are so large and no single application can meet all the land needs, where is the remainder? How do we select the remainder? So it's a bit of a chaotic process in terms of what the actual demands and the land needs are. That's why that collaborative approach and using one set of numbers is the preferred, because everyone is on the same page as to what are we planning for and how do we get there.
So the follow-up question is about the memo, which I've read, specifically item number 6, I think, which addressed the growth of the villages and the agricultural areas. Now I've heard you say no to agricultural areas, but I didn't hear any addressing of how this is going to affect the growth of the villages outside the Greenbelt.
Yeah, as part of the review in 2025, we'd look at the urban area and we'd also look at the villages as well for potential expansion.
Okay, we'll offer media another round of questions. Go ahead, Elise.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So I don't know how much you can get into this, but I'm just wondering, I understand when there's an application that's submitted and it gets rejected, that it could go to OLT. Could you expand on your answer to Councillor Lane Johnson about the possibility that the process itself of waiting until 2025 to do that review could be challenged at the OLT?
Right, so under the Planning Act today, through that process, specified persons or landowners could appeal a result if their lands are directly affected. So that means they could also take that to the OLT. Again, because it's a single process though, you would have, if there were multiple appellants, then there would be a hearing scheduled for all of the appellants. So even under an appeal process for that collaborative approach, that's actually also more efficient than if we were to look back and compare it to the applications, application, appeal, and that would be through different series of times, right? So that could actually end up taking longer than a collaborative approach that starts in 2025, even if there is an appeal cycle built in. But one of the benefits of the collaborative approach is that people are on board with the same number, so that the likelihood and number of appellants should diminish over time if there's agreement on how lands are brought in or how growth projections are moving forward.
And then I also wanted to ask about the map that you had. Sorry, this is maybe a very specific question, but you had the map and you laid out all of the different places for the different categories and how they were evaluated before. There was only one area of land that was highlighted or that was circled in purple. Could you tell me a little bit about why you highlighted that specific land?
That was just, some people might be thinking about lands that scored well last time. How would they be looked at through this process? So if council were to use and adopt a similar criteria, they would likely score very well in this process. So that's why those lands were highlighted.
And we'll now go to Joanne Lauschis. No?
Unless you have another one.
I would ask more questions.
We'll give Joanne an opportunity.
I have a question about the collaborative process. So, I mean, are there any guarantees built into it that there'll be less chance of litigation, less chance of things moving slowly?
There's no absolute guarantee, but collaboration by its nature, there would be some agreement and some satisfaction in how things are produced going forward. So, I can't say that there'll be zero appeals, but compared to an application-led process, you would think some folks would find some common ground and agreement moving forward.
Okay. This concludes our media availability. Ceci conclut le point de presse aujourd'hui. Thanks, everyone. Merci.